Since core corner magnetized Aochuang WR is quite a mouthful, I'm going to be referring to the unmodded one as the Aochuang WR and the modded one as the Aochuang WRC, which is a bit better than calling it the Aochuang 11 since it's not a reference to another brand, or more accurately speaking, another two brands. So I was mainly influenced by Cubics and Pro X Cuber to do this mod. Enter the Aochuang WR, currently standing as my main 5x5. Its profile of strength and weakness seem to line up perfectly with the benefit of core corner magnets. In terms of strength, it's a fast cube by default, so it can withstand speed reduction from modding and still not become overly slow. And while this one is more of a preference thing, its magnets are overall weaker than both the VUC and the MGC, which I definitely do enjoy. And in terms of weakness, it's the most flexible cube relative to the VUC and the MGC, and therefore it's most likely to benefit from the added stability upgrade. The Aochuang WR also possesses a Yexiao core, which you can actually put magnets into. The corners also feature hollow cavities, so you can actually just put some epoxy and stuff a magnet down there. The Aochuang WR box itself comes with 12 spare magnets. 6 of them are 4 by 1.5 mm and the other 6 are 4 by 1 mm. And obviously I can't show them to you anymore because they're all inside my cube. So this is basically the box that they came in, and you can just use the stock magnets. And if you're not that picky about consistency, you can actually core corner magnetize the Aochuang WR with just that set of 12 magnets alone, using the scheme that I described in the how many magnets do you need to magnetize your speed cube video, where you have 4 in the core and a total of 1 for each one of the 8 corners. But the only problem with doing that is that 2 of the corners will be forced to have a different variety of magnet because there are only 6 of each type. However, I actually went to take spare magnets for the MGC box in addition to what I have in the Aochuang box. So this is the accessory pack for the MGC6. The MGC6 actually came with 8 extra magnets comprising of 4 each in the same 2 dimensions as the Aochuang magnets. So although I don't know the actual end values for either brand, it actually leaves me with more than enough magnets to put 8 4x1s into the core, and for the corners I can put 1 1x5 mm into each one of the corners for a total of 8 corners. The magnets were held down using epoxy sculpt, which is a 2-part compound that hardens in a few hours. As for how I went about doing it, so I'm going to demonstrate with blue tack because I don't intend to do anything permanent right now. But what I did was, after I mixed it, I placed a little bit of epoxy sculpt on top of a column of magnets, and then I just separated out the top magnet. So in the end, it's always the same pole that is facing outside the epoxy sculpt and the same pole that is facing inside. And after that, I just stuck it where it should be, like that, and I used a pencil to push it in and shape the epoxy sculpt such that there's actually a little bit of it covering the magnet on top, so the magnet couldn't fly out. And at the same time, on the opposite side, which is the covered side facing the base of the corner, I basically just push it down as well to maximize its contact with the corner surface. And then for the core, it's the exact same process, just with the opposite pole, so that if this side faces the corner, this side faces the core, then they will attract each other. How I set it up, I basically just use Kelvin's high viscosity. So the Aochuang WRC just feels really stable. It's equally, if not more stable than my VUC, which is supposedly the most stable one out of the big 3 5x5s. However, the stability comes from a different source compared to the VUC. So with the VUC, it's just a really solid mechanism and strong magnets. But with the WRC, however, it does not have that rigid, blocky feel of the VUC. So the VUC it just feels significantly more square, and I feel like I have to finish each turn before going on to the next turn. Whereas with a regular Aochuang WR and it carried on to the WRC, is that I could actually just flow from one turn to the next much more easily without in a way it's probably because of a bit more forgiving corner cutting. So when we come to corner cutting, it's basically the same as the original WR. So the WRC will cut the same thing as the VUC forward as well, but for the reverse, which I would say that for the regular WR, it cuts about 1.2 times better, bigger with less effort basically. It's also quite an impossible cube to pop or even deform, partly because of its really huge anti-deforming mag underneath, and partly because I tensioned this cube quite tightly as well. So overall, it's actually a little bit slower than my VUC, and definitely a significant amount slower than the default WR. Although that might just be my loop not being fully broken in, but I doubt it will ever speed up as fast as the default WR. And like, however, despite all of that, one thing that still stays the same from the original WR is that it takes less effort to start a turn, like compared to, I would say, not just the fork but also the MGC, where the magnets are stronger, so like it takes more effort to start the turn and the cube stops harder. So even though it runs from point to point, the total amount of effort itself in its turning is actually not really that different. And I would say that, like, of course, this part is really subjective personal preference. I'm not really as big of a fan of a snappy feel, and I much prefer the softer feel that the WR, original version of the WR did that, but at the sacrifice of a bit of stability. It's a little bit more flimsy than both the Valk and the MGC, but then with the Aochuang WRC on the other hand, it achieves the same softness but at a super high stability. The speed, even though it's slightly sacrificed, it's not too much of a big deal, considering that the Valk is not even a slow cube in the first place. It's still a really fast 5x5, and being slightly slower than the Valk is still definitely in the usable range. Between the WR and the WRC, I actually don't know which one I like better, but for the purposes of competing or racing with someone or just having shaky hands from hypoglycemia, because WRC would just gain the upper hand, like, in comparison to the regular WR, and I actually got the 115 average of 5 on camera with this, which is in a separate video.